Pretend you're my husband for one night, she pleaded, trembling in the shadows of the tavern. She thought she was hiring a desperate mercenary to save her family's estate. She didn't know the brooding stranger was the Alpha King, and his response would change medieval history forever. She's my Luna. The rain lashed against the ancient stone walls of the Sinclair estate, mirroring the storm that raged within Lady Genevieve Sinclair's chest. The year was 1422, and the damp, oppressive air of the Scottish borderlands offered no comfort. Genevieve stood by the leaded glass window of her bedchamber, her fingers gripping the velvet drapes so tightly her knuckles bled white. Tonight was the midsummer banquet, but for Genevieve it was an execution. Her father, Lord Arthur Sinclair, had perished 3 months prior in a highly suspicious hunting accident. In his wake he left a mountain of forged debts, all held by the cruel and calculating Lord Reginald Ashford. Ashford was a man whose wealth was only eclipsed by his depravity. For weeks, he had suffocated the Sinclair family, freezing their assets and starving their tenants. His ultimatum was delivered that very morning, sealed with his heavy crimson wax crest. Genevieve would marry him before the midnight bell tolled at the banquet, or the Sinclair lands would be seized, and her younger sister, Beatrice, would be sold into indentured servitude across the sea to cover the remaining gold crowns. There was only one legal loophole, a dusty, archaic law known as the Times Lex Maritalis. If Genevieve could present a lawfully wedded husband of her own choosing before Ashford claimed her, her mother's ancestral trust, a vast fortune of untethered silver, would unlock, instantly neutralizing the debt. But she had no suitors. Ashford had threatened to slaughter any man who dared look in her direction. Desperation is a powerful alchemist. It turns noble women into beggars. Throwing a heavy wool cloak over her emerald silk banquet gown, Genevieve slipped out through the servants' entrance into the muddy, torrential night. She bypassed the brightly lit great hall where Ashford was already holding court and hurried toward the Times Boar and Barrel, a rough tavern on the edge of the fiefdom where mercenaries, exiles, and travelers sought refuge. The tavern smelled of stale ale, wet dog, and wood smoke. Genevieve kept her hood pulled low, her heart hammering against her ribs like a trapped bird. She needed a man, any man who was brave enough, or foolish enough, to sign a piece of parchment. That was when she saw him. He sat alone in the darkest corner of the tavern, a mountain of a man wrapped in thick, dark furs that looked suspiciously like wolf pelts. Even seated, his sheer size was intimidating. He had broad, corded shoulders and long, raven-black hair that fell around a jawline carved from granite, but it was his eyes that caught her breath. They were a striking, unnatural shade of amber, glowing faintly in the dim candlelight. A jagged silver scar ran down the left side of his face, a testament to violent, bloody battles he had clearly won. He radiated danger. Every other patron in the tavern instinctively gave his table a wide berth. Genevieve swallowed her terror. He will do. He looks like a man who fears nothing. She approached his table, the rustle of her silk hidden beneath a heavy cloak. When she stopped before him, he didn't look up from his tankard of ale, but a low, vibrating hum resonated from his chest. It sounded almost like a growl. "I have gold," Genevieve whispered, her voice trembling despite her best efforts. The stranger slowly raised his head. When his amber eyes locked onto hers, a strange electric shock shot down Genevieve's spine. The air between them grew suddenly heavy, thick with the scent of pine, ozone, and impending rain. "I have no need for gold, little bird." His voice was a deep, gravelly baritone that sent shivers across her skin. "And this is no place for a high-born lady." "You don't understand," she pleaded, stepping closer, closing the distance. "I need your help. I need—" She hesitated, the absurdity of her request catching in her throat. "Pretend you're my husband for one night." The stranger's eyebrows rose. For a moment, complete silence enveloped their corner of the tavern. "A husband," he repeated, the word rolling off his tongue with a dangerous velvet softness. Just on paper, Genevieve rushed on, pulling a leather pouch from beneath her cloak and dropping it on the wooden table. It clinked heavily. 500 gold crowns. Tomorrow morning, when the magistrate validates the union, you take the gold and leave. I will annul the marriage by dusk. You will never see me again." He stared at the gold, then back at her face. He inhaled deeply, his nostrils flaring as if he were tasting her very scent on the air. A strange shadow passed over his face, a mix of shock and fierce, primal hunger that he quickly masked. Dominic Warwick, the alpha king of the northern clans, had spent a century searching for his fated mate. He had come to Ashbourne in disguise to root out a human noble who had been illegally smuggling silver weapons into Lycan territory. He expected a political assassination. He did not expect his mate, smelling of wild heather, rain, and absolute terror, to walk up to him and offer him gold to marry her. His wolf howled in the back of his mind, thrashing against his ribs. "Mine. Mate. Claim her." Dominic leaned forward, his massive frame eclipsing the candlelight. "Who are you hiding from, little bird?" "Lord Reginald Ashford," she whispered, a tear finally escaping her eye. "If I am not wed by midnight, he takes my home. He takes my sister. Please, you look like a man who isn't afraid of a fight." Dominic's lips curved into a dark, predatory smile. Ashford, the very man he was here to destroy. The fates had a twisted sense of humor. "Keep your gold," Dominic said, standing up. He towered over her, easily 6.5 feet of pure lethal muscle. "I will sign your parchment." The village church was empty save for the flickering tallow candles, and the terrified local priest, Father Bartholomew. He shook violently as Dominic slammed the iron-wrought door shut behind them, locking out the storm. "Lady Genevieve," the priest stammered, his eyes darting to the giant beside her. "You cannot be serious. Lord Ashford will burn this parish to the ground." "Lord Ashford does not own God, Father," Genevieve said firmly, though her hands shook as she produced the marriage ledger. "Marry us, now. The midnight bell approaches." Father Bartholomew hastily muttered the Latin rites, rushing through the sacred vows as if the devil himself were breathing down his neck. When it came time to sign, Genevieve penned her elegant signature. She handed the quill to the stranger. He took it, his large, calloused fingers dwarfing the delicate feather. He wrote 2 words in bold, sharp strokes. "Dominic Warwick." "Dominic," Genevieve whispered, testing the name. It felt heavy and powerful on her tongue. "Now," Dominic said, turning to her. His gaze dropped to her lips for a fraction of a second, causing her pulse to skyrocket. "We have a banquet to attend, wife." They walked back to Castle Ashbourne, Genevieve clinging to his massive arm. She noticed, with quiet bewilderment, that despite the freezing downpour, Dominic was radiating an unnatural heat. He felt like a walking furnace, and his skin was completely dry mere moments after the rain hit him. The great hall of Castle Ashbourne was a riot of color, music, and gluttony. Nobles in velvet and silk gorged on roasted pheasant and heavily spiced wine. At the head of the hall, sitting upon a raised dais that rightfully belonged to the Sinclair family, sat Lord Reginald Ashford. He was a sallow, cruel-looking man with thinning hair and a permanent sneer. Beside the dais stood his personal guard, the Black Dog Mercenaries, infamous for their brutality. The heavy oak doors of the great hall groaned open. The music abruptly ceased. The chatter died in the throats of the lords and ladies. Genevieve stepped into the light, her chin held high, the emerald silk of her gown sweeping the rushes on the floor. Beside her walked Dominic. He had shed his wet fur cloak, revealing a tunic of pitch-black leather that stretched taut over his broad chest. He looked like a god of war descending upon a feast of frightened mortals. Ashford stood up, knocking his silver goblet over. Dark wine spilled across the white linen tablecloth like blood. "Genevieve," Ashford hissed, his face purpling with rage. "What is the meaning of this? Who is this filthy savage?" "Mind your tongue, Lord Ashford," Genevieve said, her voice echoing in the silent hall. She unrolled the parchment. "I present to you my lawfully wedded husband, Dominic Warwick. By the laws of the times, Lex Maritalis, the Sinclair Trust is now unlocked. My father's debts will be paid in full by morning. Your claim to my family, my sister, and my lands is null and void." The hall erupted into scandalous whispers. Ashford's eyes narrowed into dark, venomous slits. He looked at Dominic, assessing the threat. A fraud, Ashford spat. You think you can drag a common tavern rat into the light and claim him as a lord? He has no title, no standing. The marriage is a mockery. The ledger is signed by the church, Dominic spoke for the first time. His voice rumbled through the great hall, so deep and commanding that several nobles physically flinched. The law does not require a title. It requires a husband. She has one. Ashford's jaw clenched. He signaled vaguely with his hand. Come up here, Genevieve. Let us toast to your newfound happiness. We shall see if this peasant survives the night. A servant, trembling in his boots, approached Dominic with a silver chalice of wine. Genevieve reached for it, customary for the bride to drink first, but Dominic caught her wrist. His reflexes were impossibly fast. Dominic brought the chalice beneath his nose. His amber eyes flared brilliantly in the torchlight. The scent of sweet wine masked it well, but his heightened wolf senses instantly caught the bitter, earthy tang of wolfsbane and hemlock. A lethal dose meant to stop a man's heart in minutes. A generous vintage, Dominic murmured, staring dead into Ashford's eyes. Slowly, without breaking eye contact, Dominic tightened his grip on the thick silver chalice. Genevieve gasped as the solid silver began to bend, then crush inward like cheap tin in Dominic's bare hand. The poisoned wine burst through his fingers, splashing onto the stone floor where it began to hiss and bubble against the rushes. Dominic tossed the mangled ball of silver at Ashford's feet. It hit the stone with a deafening clatter. I prefer my drinks without poison, Ashford, Dominic growled, and I prefer my wife without your eyes on her. The crushed silver goblet was the spark that ignited the powder keg. Kill him, Ashford shrieked, all pretense of civility vanishing. Kill the savage and seize the girl. 6 black dog mercenaries drew their broadswords, the steel singing in the silent hall, and rushed Dominic. Genevieve screamed, reaching for a carving knife from a nearby table, but Dominic simply pushed her gently behind him. The first mercenary swung a heavy, two-handed blow aimed at Dominic's neck. Dominic didn't even draw a weapon. He stepped inside the guard with blinding, unnatural speed, catching the mercenary's wrist. A sickening crack times echoed through the hall as the man's arm snapped. Dominic threw the fully armored man across the room as if he weighed no more than a child's rag doll. He crashed into a massive tapestry, pulling down the stonework with him. The remaining 5 hesitated, their eyes wide with disbelief. Is that all? Dominic mocked, a low, guttural growl vibrating in his throat. They attacked in unison. Dominic moved like a shadow, a blur of lethal precision. He shattered kneecaps, dislocated shoulders, and threw men into the roaring hearth. He did not kill them, but he dismantled them with a brutal, terrifying efficiency. Within seconds, the elite mercenaries were groaning in bloody heaps on the floor. Dominic stood amidst the carnage, chest heaving slightly, uninjured. The lords and ladies of Ashbourne were cowering under the banquet tables. Order! I demand order in the name of the crown. Lord Hugh Chamberlain, the king's appointed magistrate for the region, stepped forward from the trembling crowd. He was a portly man, sweating profusely, holding his seal of office out like a shield. Arrest this man! Ashford screamed, pointing a shaking finger at Dominic. He has shed blood in a sovereign hall. He is a murderer, an animal. The marriage is void. I demand his execution. Magistrate Chamberlain looked at the broken bodies, then at Dominic. Sir, you have assaulted sanctioned guards. Under the king's law, unless you possess noble blood that affords you a trial by combat, you are to be chained and hanged. Chamberlain looked at Genevieve with pity. My lady, this marriage cannot stand. He is a criminal. Genevieve felt the world collapse around her. She had tried. God, she had tried. But she had dragged this stranger into her mess, and now he was going to die for it, and she would be bound to Ashford anyway. Dominic, run, she whispered, tugging at his leather tunic. Please, run. Dominic looked down at her. The violent storm in his amber eyes instantly softened. He reached up, his large hand gently cupping her cheek. His thumb brushed over her cheekbone, a profoundly intimate gesture in a room full of enemies. "I told you, little bird," he said softly. "I sign my name, and I keep what is mine." Suddenly, the heavy oak doors of the great hall did not just open, they were blown off their iron hinges, crashing to the floor with the force of a thunderclap. Through the dust and splintered wood marched a dozen warriors. But these were not common soldiers. They were giants, wearing heavy plate armor adorned with the crest of the direwolf, the legendary sigil of the northern reaches, the mythical kingdom that human lords whispered about in terrified, hushed tones. At the head of the phalanx was a man with scars across his nose and golden eyes, Cedric Dominix Beta. The northern warriors marched in perfect unison, ignoring the screaming nobles, and halted directly behind Dominic. In a move that made the magistrate drop his seal of office in sheer horror, all 12 heavily armed giants dropped to one knee, bowing their heads in absolute submission to the man Genevieve had found in a muddy tavern. "My king," Cedric spoke, his voice carrying over the stunned silence. "The perimeter is secured. The silver smuggling routes in Lord Ashford's lower vaults have been seized." "King?" Ashford gasped, his face draining of all color. He backed up, hitting the edge of the dais. "No, it's a myth. The Lycan King. He hasn't crossed the border in a century." Dominic turned his gaze to Ashford. The glamour, the human guise he wore, began to slip. His eyes shifted from amber to a blinding, glowing gold. The temperature in the room skyrocketed. The sheer, suffocating pressure of his alpha aura slammed into the room, forcing every human, including the magistrate and Ashford, to their knees under the crushing weight of his dominance. Genevieve was the only one standing, completely unaffected by the aura, staring at her fake husband in shock. "You smuggle silver into my lands, Ashford." Dominic's voice was no longer human. It was dual-toned, echoing with the growl of the beast beneath his skin. "You plot against my kind. And worse, you dare threaten what belongs to me." "It's a sham!" Ashford whimpered from his knees, blood dripping from his nose due to the pressure of the alpha aura. "She tricked you! It's a fake marriage to steal my gold!" Genevieve closed her eyes, waiting for Dominic to agree, to step away, to reveal this was just a convenient cover for his political raid. Instead, Dominic's arm wrapped around her waist, pulling her flush against his solid, burning chest. He turned to the entire hall of kneeling, terrified nobles. "She is not a trick," Dominic announced, his voice booming like thunder, shaking the very foundations of Castle Ashbourne. "She is not a sham." He looked down at Genevieve, his golden eyes filled with an ancient, fiery devotion that stole the breath from her lungs. "She is not just my wife. She is my Luna." The absolute silence that followed Dominic's declaration was deafening. Lord Reginald Ashford remained on his knees, his face pressed against the cold stone floor, utterly broken by the crushing, invisible weight of the Alpha's command. The great hall of Castle Ashbourne, moments before a den of wolves in sheep's clothing, had been conquered by the true apex predator. Genevieve could barely process the reality warping around her, her husband. The man she had hired in a dingy tavern for 500 gold crowns was a myth made flesh, the Alpha King of the Northern clans. Dominic's glowing golden eyes slowly faded back to their striking, piercing amber. The suffocating pressure in the room lifted, and the human nobles gasped for air, scrambling toward the edges of the hall like frightened mice. "Cedric," Dominic's voice was a low, terrifying rumble that brooked no argument. "Take Ashford and his surviving dogs to the dungeons. Strip them of their weapons. Send word to the border garrisons that the silver smuggling route ends tonight." "At once, my king," Cedric bowed, signaling the giant Lycan warriors to haul the weeping Lord Ashford away. Dominic turned back to Genevieve. The terrifying warlord melted away, replaced once more by the intensely focused, dangerously captivating man from the tavern. He reached out, his thumb gently tracing the line of her jaw. His skin was still radiating that impossible, furnace-like heat. "Are you harmed, Genevieve?" he asked softly, speaking her name as if it were a sacred prayer. I am not," she stammered, her mind racing to catch up with her reality. You are the Lycan King. I am Dominic, he corrected gently, and you are my mate. The fates designed you for me, little bird. I just never expected to find you offering me a bag of gold in a muddy tavern. But the marriage, it was only supposed to be for one night, she whispered, her heart hammering wildly against her ribs. Dominic leaned in, his lips brushing against her ear, sending a cascade of sparks down her spine. I do not sign contracts for a single night, Genevieve. You invoked the times, Lex Maritalis. You claimed me before God and man. You are mine now, as I am yours. And tomorrow we ride for the north. Before dawn broke, the Sinclair estate was firmly under Lycan protection. Genevieve's younger sister Beatrice, a bright-eyed girl of 16, was safely secured in a reinforced carriage, marveling at the towering wolfmen who guarded her with fiercely loyal, golden-eyed devotion. The journey to the northern reaches was a grueling 5-day trek through dense, primeval forests and jagged mountain passes. As they crossed the border, the temperature plummeted, giving way to a land of perpetual winter and harsh, unyielding beauty. They arrived at the fortress of Kerlaverock, a monolithic citadel carved directly into the side of a massive, glacier-capped mountain. It was a marvel of ancient engineering, fortified by black stone and illuminated by massive iron braziers that cast dancing, fiery shadows against the snow. As Dominic's massive black destrier rode through the iron portcullis with Genevieve seated securely in front of him, the fortress erupted into a cacophony of sound. Thousands of Lycan's men, women, and children gathered in the sprawling courtyards, their cheers echoing off the mountain peaks. They beat their chests and howled into the freezing sky, a primal, bone-rattling sound that welcomed their king home. But not all eyes held reverence. As Dominic helped Genevieve dismount in the central courtyard, she felt the prickle of hostile stares. Standing atop the grand stone staircase were the elders of the Lycan Council. They wore heavy pelts of white and gray, their faces scarred and hardened by centuries of brutal survival. Leading them was Lord Balthazar, a towering, silver-haired Lycan with a face like carved granite and eyes that burned with cold disdain. "My king," Balthazar said, his voice dripping with barely concealed insolence. He did not bow. "You bring a human to Kerlaverock, a fragile, scentless human. And the whispers say you intend to seat her on the obsidian throne as our Luna." Dominic stepped in front of Genevieve, his broad shoulders blocking the biting wind. "The whispers are late, Balthazar. She is already my Luna. The bond is fated." "Fated?" Balthazar scoffed, stepping down a single stair. "She is a Sinclair, the very family whose lands harbor the silver mines that have been bleeding our kin dry for a decade. Do you think it a coincidence that she sought you out?" "It is a trick, a human deception." Genevieve's blood ran cold. "Silver mines? On Sinclair lands? That is a lie." Genevieve stepped out from behind Dominic, her voice surprisingly steady despite the terror gripping her heart. "My family's estate is entirely agricultural. We possess no silver mines." "Do you play the fool, or are you truly ignorant, girl?" Balthazar sneered. "Your uncle, Lord Frederick Sinclair, has been funneling raw silver to Ashford for years. They forged your father's debts to force you into a marriage with Ashford, legally transferring the Sinclair lands entirely into their control so they could strip mine the territory without crown interference. You are not a mate. You are an assassin in a silk dress." Genevieve's breath hitched. Uncle Frederick, the man who had wept at her father's funeral, the man who had mysteriously left for the capital just days before Ashford demanded her hand, it all clicked with sickening clarity. Her father's hunting accident, the sudden, insurmountable debts. It was all a meticulously crafted conspiracy by her own flesh and blood. Dominic's growl shattered the tense silence. It was a sound so deep and violent that the stones beneath their feet seemed to vibrate. "Her uncle's sins are his own, Balthazar," Dominic roared, his eyes flashing gold. "She is my mate. If you question my judgment, you challenge my claim. Do you wish to challenge, Balthazar?" Balthazar's eyes narrowed, shifting briefly to a predatory yellow. For a long, suffocating moment, the courtyard held its breath. Then, the elder backed down, lowering his chin in a stiff, mocking bow. No challenge, my king, Balthazar murmured. But the ancient laws dictate that any Luna, especially an outsider, must prove her worth to the pack. She must survive the trial of the blood moon. If she truly is fated by the goddess, the forest will not harm her. If she is a deceiver. Balthazar smiled, revealing elongated, sharp canines. The forest will consume her. Dominic's jaw clenched so tightly, the muscle jumped. She is human. The trial is designed for lichens. It is a death sentence. Then she is no Luna, Balthazar countered, looking directly at Genevieve. And she has no place on the throne. Genevieve looked at Dominic. She saw the raw, terrifying power in his eyes, but beneath it, she saw a profound, desperate fear. He would tear the council apart for her. He would start a civil war right here on the steps of his own castle to protect her. And if he did, he would lose his kingdom. He would be remembered as a tyrant who slaughtered his own people for a human stranger. She could not let him destroy his legacy for her. She had come to a tavern, looking for a mercenary, but she had found a king. It was time she acted like a queen. I accept, Genevieve's voice rang out, clear and unwavering in the freezing air. Dominic whipped his head around, staring at her in absolute shock. Genevieve, no. I accept the trial of the blood moon, she repeated, stepping forward, meeting Balthazar's cold gaze without flinching. I will prove my loyalty to the pack. I will prove my worth. But when I survive, Balthazar, you will kneel. Balthazar's sneer vanished, replaced by a flicker of genuine surprise. Bold words for a little bird. The blood moon rises in 3 days. Prepare yourself, human. For 3 days, Dominic refused to leave her side. He paced the grand chambers of the fortress like a caged beast, his protective instincts pushed to the absolute breaking point. He tried to forbid her from participating, threatened to lock her in the highest tower, and even considered abdicating the throne entirely. You do not understand the woods of the north, Genevieve, Dominic pleaded on the final night, his large hands gripping her shoulders. There are dire beasts out there, rogue wolves. The cold alone can stop a human heart in hours. I cannot lose you. I just found you. Genevieve reached up, her delicate hands cupping his rough, scarred face. The absolute terror in the eyes of this mighty king broke her heart, but it also forged her resolve into steel. I survived Ashford, she whispered fiercely. I survived my uncle's betrayal, and I survived walking up to the most dangerous man in a tavern full of killers. I am not fragile, Dominic. I am a Sinclair, and I am your mate. Dominic closed his eyes, leaning his forehead against hers. A ragged breath escaped his lips. If you do not return by dawn, I will burn the forest to ash. I swear it to the old gods. The trial of the blood moon began at midnight. The moon hung low and swollen in the sky, casting an eerie crimson glow over the ancient, snow-covered pines of the Whispering Woods. The rules were brutally simple. Genevieve had to traverse the cursed forest, retrieve the ancient silver chalice from the ruined temple of the first pack at the center of the woods, and return it to the fortress by dawn. She was given no weapons, only a thick fur cloak and a single torch. As she walked into the tree line, the heavy iron gates of the fortress slammed shut behind her, echoing with a haunting finality. The cold was immediate and unforgiving. It bit through the thick fur, sinking into her bones. The silence of the forest was unnatural, broken only by the crunch of her boots in the deep snow and the occasional, distant howl that sent shivers down her spine. She walked for hours, navigating by the position of the crimson moon. Fear gnawed at her sanity, shadows playing tricks on her eyes, twisting the ancient trees into grasping, monstrous hands. But every time she thought of turning back, she remembered Dominic's golden eyes. She remembered the warmth of his chest, the fierce, undeniable pull of their bond. She pressed on. Deep in the heart of the woods, she found it, the ruined temple of the first pack. It was a circle of massive, weathered monoliths, heavily blanketed in snow. In the center, resting upon a stone altar, gleamed the silver chalice. Genevieve let out a breath of relief, her breath pluming in the freezing air. She hurried forward, reaching out to claim her prize. I must admit, niece, I didn't think you would make it this far. Genevieve froze. The voice was smooth, cultured, and horribly familiar. Stepping out from behind one of the massive monoliths was Lord Frederick Sinclair. He was wrapped in heavy furs, holding a loaded crossbow, but he was not alone. Behind him stepped Lord Balthazar and 3 other Lycan warriors. "Uncle Frederick," Genevieve breathed, horror dawning on her. "Balthazar informed me of the little test you foolishly accepted," Frederick said, stepping into the crimson moonlight. "I couldn't resist coming to ensure you failed. You have been a thorn in my side for far too long, Genevieve. If you had just married Ashford, this would all be over. We would have the silver, and you would be comfortably miserable." "You killed father," she stated, the grief finally hardening into pure, unadulterated rage. "Arthur was weak," Frederick sneered. "He refused to touch the silver veins beneath our feet because of some archaic treaty with these beasts." He gestured lazily to Balthazar. "Fortunately, Lord Balthazar here is a visionary. He understands that gold is far more powerful than loyalty to a king who favors humans." "You are committing treason, Balthazar," Genevieve said, looking at the Lycan elder. "Dominic will slaughter you. The king will find your frozen corpse, torn apart by rogue wolves," Balthazar growled, his eyes flashing yellow. "A tragic failure of the trial. He will be broken. The council will deem him unfit to rule in his grief, and I will take the throne. And your uncle will mine the silver in peace." Frederick raised the crossbow, aiming directly at Genevieve's chest. "A shame, really. You look just like your mother. Goodbye, Genevieve." He pulled the trigger. The iron bolt flew through the air with a deadly times thwack, but it never reached her. A massive, terrifying blur of black and gold erupted from the tree canopy above, slamming into the snow between Genevieve and her executioners. The impact shook the ground, kicking up a massive cloud of snow and ice. Dominic stood there, completely shifted into his Lycan form. He was a nightmare of muscle, black fur, and razor-sharp claws, towering over 8 feet tall. The crossbow bolt was embedded in his massive shoulder, but he barely seemed to notice it. He ripped it out with a sickening squelch and tossed it aside. He hadn't stayed in the fortress. He had tracked her the entire time, hidden in the shadows, waiting. Dominic unleashed a roar so deafening, so filled with ancient, primordial fury, that the trees themselves seemed to shudder. "Treason," Dominic's voice, was the sound of grinding boulders, speaking through the jaw of the beast. Balthazar's eyes widened in sheer panic. "Kill him!" he shrieked to his warriors. "He is 1, we are 4. But Balthazar had gravely miscalculated the power of a true alpha king defending his mate. Dominic moved with explosive, blinding violence. The first traitorous Lycan lunged, only for Dominic to catch him by the throat and hurl him against a stone monolith with bone-shattering force. The second was disemboweled by a single sweeping strike of Dominic's massive claws. Balthazar shifted, turning into a massive gray wolf, and charged. He managed to sink his teeth into Dominic's side, drawing a spray of hot blood. But Dominic didn't flinch. He grabbed Balthazar by the scruff of his neck and slammed him into the stone altar, splintering the ancient rock. He pinned the elder down, his jaws snapping inches from Balthazar's throat. Frederick, realizing the battle was lost, turned to flee into the woods. "No, you don't," Genevieve snarled. She didn't think, she just acted. She grabbed the heavy silver chalice from the broken altar and threw it with all her might. The heavy silver struck Frederick squarely in the back of the head. He crumpled face first into the snow, knocked out cold. The clearing fell silent, save for the heavy, ragged breathing of the Alpha King. Dominic stood over the broken body of Balthazar, who was whimpering in submission, exposing his throat to his king. Dominic shifted back into his human form. He was covered in blood, some his own, mostly his enemies', and shivering from the adrenaline. He ignored the traitors on the ground and turned to Genevieve. He dropped to his knees in the snow before her. "You followed me," she whispered, her hands shaking as she reached out to touch his bloodied shoulder. "I will always follow you," Dominic rasped, gazing up at her with a devotion so absolute it stole the breath from her lungs. "To the edge of the world, to the depths of hell. I am yours, Genevieve. Only yours." Genevieve knelt in the snow beside him, wrapping her arms around his massive, trembling frame, burying her face in his chest. In the freezing heart of the cursed woods, surrounded by the blood of their enemies, they sealed their bond. By dawn, they returned to Kerlaverock. Dominic carried Genevieve through the open iron gates, holding the silver chalice high for all to see. Balthazar and the surviving traitors were dragged in chains behind them, while Uncle Frederick was thrown at the feet of the magistrate. The fortress erupted into a roar of triumph that shook the mountains. The whispers ceased. The doubts were silenced forever. Genevieve Sinclair, the human girl who had walked into a tavern to buy a fake husband, sat upon the obsidian throne of the northern reaches. She was no longer just a high-born lady escaping a debt. She was the architect of her family's salvation, the unearther of a kingdom's greatest betrayal, and the undeniably fated mate of the most dangerous man in the world. She was the Luna, and her reign had just begun. And that is the epic conclusion of Genevieve and the Alpha King. Did you expect Uncle Frederick to be the mastermind behind it all? Let us know in the comments below. If you loved this medieval werewolf romance filled with drama and twists, please drop a like, share this with your friends, and subscribe video for more incredible stories every single week. See you in the next one.